Welcome back, my little murder mitten kittens colony. Today we are going to be diving in to none other than The Only One Left by Riley Sager. So imagine this. It's the fall of 1983, and we're following Kit McDeere. She's a seasoned home caregiver, 12 years on the job. But she's just coming back after a 6-month suspension, unpaid. Not exactly a warm welcome back. And the reason? It's pretty heavy. Her last patient was her own mother, Kathleen, who was dying of an aggressive form of cancer. The pain got so bad, she overdosed on fentanyl, medication that was supposed to help her, but ended up killing her. The state health board cleared Kit, said she wasn't responsible. No charges. But still, there's this unspoken expectation. Be grateful you even have a job. So Kit is assigned to a new patient. And at this point, she does accept the job because she really doesn't have any other choice. And then she hears the name of her new patient, Lenora Hope. And that name? It sticks. Because back in her hometown, Lenora Hope isn't just some elderly woman. She's basically a ghost story. A local legend tied to a brutal massacre in 1929, when her entire family was murdered. There's literally a creepy playground rhyme about her, blaming her for it. So, yeah, not exactly a normal gig. Kit shows up at Hope's End, this massive, crumbling 36-room estate perched on a cliff in Maine. It's the kind of place that used to be grand, but now feels like it's just rotting in place. Still, Kit tells herself she's here to do a job. Caregiving. That's what she's good at. She's going to treat Lenora like any other patient. Except nothing about this is normal. There are strange noises in the house, the staff acts off, and Lenora, well, she can't speak or move. At least that's what everyone says. But she can type. Slowly, painfully, and what she starts typing is a story. Her version of what happened the night her family died. And that's where Kit gets pulled in. She starts asking questions, poking around. She compares notes with Carter, the groundskeeper, and Jessie, the maid. But she has to be careful. There are longtime staff members, Mrs. Baker and Chef Archie, who seem like they're watching everything. The deeper Kit digs, the worse it gets. Every answer just leads to more questions. And then things take a horrifying turn. Kit discovers the body of her predecessor, the last caregiver, Mary. Dead. Hidden. Forgotten. At that point, it's not just curiosity anymore. Kit realizes someone might be willing to kill to keep the truth buried. Then comes a huge break in the case. Kit learns that Lenora was pregnant at the time of the original murders. That detail cracks everything open. She tracks down someone from back in the day. Pieces start falling into place. And it all leads to this final confrontation with Mrs. Baker. Except Miss Baker isn't Miss Baker. She's Lenora. And what follows is the full, brutal truth. It turns out the woman Kit had been caring for all along isn't Lenora. It's her sister, Virginia. That night in 1929, it was chaos. Virginia had just given birth, and her baby was taken from her almost immediately. Their father had bribed the child's father to disappear. Devastated and furious, Virginia confronted him, and in a blind rage, she tried to kill him. Their mother intervened, grabbed the knife, and stabbed both her husband and herself. But not enough to kill either of them. Then Virginia's lover shows up, and at the mother's urging, he stabs her on the staircase, leaving her to bleed out. Virginia, completely shattered, tries to hang herself. She survives, but everyone assumes she dies months later when Lenora has her declared dead. But she didn't die. Instead, the sisters switch lives in the most twisted way imaginable. Lenora disappears into the identity of their governess, Miss Baker, and spends years abroad. Meanwhile, Virginia eventually returns and takes on Lenora's identity. By then, no one who knew the truth is left. It's a total identity swap, sealed by time and silence. And then, just when you think it can't get more personal for Kit, it does. She discovers that Virginia's lover, the one involved in all of the bloodshed, was her own father, Ricky. Which means the baby that was taken all those years ago, that's Kit's half-brother. But Ricky's story doesn't stop there. He confesses to something even more disturbing. He killed Mary, the previous caregiver. And worse, he let Kit's mother take that fatal dose of fentanyl. He didn't stop her. He allowed it to happen. He says he would have turned himself in if Kit had been charged. But that's not exactly comforting. And then everything explodes. Literally. Ricky attacks Virginia and Lenora, and in the chaos, the already decaying Hope's End starts to collapse. The entire house is coming down around them. Ricky helps Kit get Virginia out, onto the front lawn, to safety. But then, he goes back inside. He sits down next to Lenora on the collapsing steps of the house, and he chooses to die there with her. The building gives way, and they're both swallowed into the rubble, disappearing into the sea below. After all that, Kit takes Virginia back to her childhood home. For a while, there's something like peace. But the story's not done with its twists. One day, Virginia is just gone, and she leaves behind a letter. In it, she reveals the final truth. She was never as helpless as she seemed. She could speak, she could move, she could walk the whole time. And now she's asking Kit to come with her, along with Archie and Jessie, who's revealed to be Virginia's granddaughter. They leave everything behind and travel the world together, eventually settling at Virginia's villa in Italy. And that's where the story finally slows down. Virginia lives out the rest of her life there, until she dies at 101. It's one of those stories where every layer you peel back just reveals something darker underneath. Family secrets, betrayal, identity, and just an unbelievable amount of blood in the foundations of this one crumbling house. And if you're sitting there thinking, this feels eerily familiar, like you've heard echoes of the story before, you're not wrong. Because what makes this mystery hit even harder is that it's not just standing on its own. It's pulling from some of the most infamous, unsettling corners of true crime and Gothic storytelling, and remixing them into something even darker. Take Lizzie Borden. When Kit first hears the name Lenora Hope, that's immediately where her mind goes. And honestly, it's hard not to make that connection. Lizzie Borden, if you remember, was accused of brutally murdering her father and stepmother with an axe back in 1892. More on that later in our Claw and Order section. And the case completely consumed the public. She was tried, sensationalized, turned into this almost mythical figure, and then acquitted. But it didn't matter. Public opinion had already decided who she was. And just like Lizzie, Lenora got turned into a rhyme, a playground chant, something kids would whisper and giggle about, completely detached from the real horror behind it. That's exactly what happens here. Lenora isn't just a woman. She's a story people tell each other, a warning, a punchline wrapped in blood. And that's what's really interesting is how both of these women existed in worlds that did not allow them to be anything but innocent. Proper daughters, quiet, obedient, grateful. So when something violent happens, especially something this violent, the idea that they could be responsible isn't just shocking. It's almost unacceptable. That tension, that's where the obsession comes from. Because society at that time couldn't quite reconcile these two ideas. Women as gentle and passive, and women capable of absolute brutality. So instead, both Lizzie and Lenora get stuck in this in-between space, never proven guilty, but never truly free either. And what do? They withdraw. They disappear into these isolated worlds. Lizzie in her private estate, Lenora locked inside Hope's End, where people can keep watching them from a distance, turning their lives into a kind of ongoing spectacle. Now layer that on top of all the Gothic influence, and suddenly everything clicks into place. Now, let's talk about the mind behind this masterpiece, because Riley Sager isn't actually Riley Sager. That's a pen name. The real author is Todd Ritter, who also writes under another name, Alan Finn. So right away, you've got this kind of layered identity thing happening, even before you get into the book itself, which honestly feels very on brand for a story all about hidden truths and people not being who they seem. As Riley Sager, he's really carved out a space in that fast-paced, twisted thriller world. You might have heard of Final Girls, which kind of put him on the map back in 2017. It's very meta, playing with horror movie survivor tropes. Or The House Across the Lake from 2022, which leans into that voyeuristic watching something you shouldn't be watching kind of suspense. And then with The Only One Left, he shifts into something that feels a little moodier, a little darker, almost more classic. It's still a thriller at its core, but now he's layering in that full Gothic atmosphere. Isolated mansion, family secrets, unreliable histories, just all of it. At the center of it, of course, is Kit McDeere, our caregiver stepping into what she thinks is just a job, and instead walking straight into a decades-old nightmare. And that's really where Sager shines, taking a simple setup and slowly tightening it until you realize you're trapped in something way bigger and way more dangerous than you expected. And to really understand how all of this unravels, you've got to look at the people inside Hope's End. Because every character in the story is carrying secrets, and some of them are absolutely deadly. Let's start with Kit, because this entire story really unfolds through her perspective. And honestly, Kit already feels emotionally worn down before she even steps foot inside Hope's End. She spends most of her life in this same small Maine town, working as a home caregiver for over a decade. And she's genuinely good at it. Taking care of people is one of the things in her life that gives her stability, but it also isolated her. She doesn't really have close relationships outside of work. And after what happened with her mother, there's this constant guilt hanging over her, whether she wants to admit it or not. Because 6 months before the story starts, Kit's mother dies from an overdose of pain medication while under Kit's care. She's cleared legally, no charges, nothing criminal, but socially, that's a different story. The town judges her, the media tears her apart, and even Kit herself can't fully let go of the fact that she left those pills within reach. So by the time she takes the job at Hope's End, it doesn't just feel like employment. It feels like somebody desperately trying to rebuild their life. And what makes Kit work so well as a main character is that she doesn't come into this acting fearless. She's cautious, practical, and observant. But once she realizes something inside that house is deeply wrong, she can't stop herself from digging further, even when it starts putting her in real danger. And that danger leads her straight to the woman at the center of the entire legend. Or at least the woman everyone thinks is at the center of it. Because the Lenora Hope Kit is hired to care for isn't actually Lenora at all. It's Virginia. And honestly, Virginia might be the most tragic character in the entire novel. Back in 1929, she's the sheltered teenager who falls in love, gets pregnant, and genuinely believes she's about to escape her controlling family and start a life of her own. And instead, everything collapses in a single night. Her baby is taken from her. The man she trusted betrays her. Violence erupts inside the house. And by the end of it, Virginia loses more than her freedom. She loses her identity entirely. She spends decades trapped inside Hope's End, forced to live as Lenora, while the real Lenora disappears into another life completely. And what makes Virginia so fascinating is that the entire book presents her like she's helpless, silent, fragile, almost ghost-like. But underneath all of that, she's been surviving for years, watching everything happening around her, quietly holding on to the truth until somebody finally comes along willing to listen. And that brings us to the real Lenora, hiding in plain sight the entire time as Miss Baker. And honestly, she might be one of the coldest characters Riley Sager has written. Because Lenora doesn't just lie to people. She rebuilds reality around herself. Growing up, she consistently felt rejected by her father. And over time, that bitterness turns into this obsession with control. So when everything falls apart that night in 1929, Lenora sees an opportunity. Not to save her sister, not to protect her family, but to take control of the story. She swaps identity with Virginia, traps her inside Hope's End, and spends decades maintaining this massive illusion. And by the time Kit arrives, Miss Baker basically rules the house like a prison ward. Everybody walks carefully around her. The staff fears her. Even the mansion itself feels tense whenever she's around. And what makes her so unsettling is that she'd rather destroy everything than lose control over the narrative she created. But the person who really ties the past and the present timelines together in the darkest way possible is Ricky. Because at first, Ricky just sounds like part of Virginia's tragic backstory. The local boys she fell in love with before everything went wrong. He promises they'll run away together, build a life together. But when the pressure hits, he takes money from Virginia's father and abandons her. And that betrayal helps trigger the entire chain reaction of violence that destroys the Hope family. But Riley Sager doesn't leave Ricky in the past. Years later, Kit discovers something that completely reframes the entire story. Ricky is her father, which suddenly connects Kit to Hope's End in a way she never could have imagined. And somehow, Ricky becomes even more disturbing in the present timeline. He confesses to killing Mary, the caregiver who came before Kit. He also admits he allowed Kit's mother to overdose without stopping her. And what makes him so unsettling is how calmly he tries to justify all of it, framing his actions like twisted acts of protection instead of manipulation and violence. By the end, Ricky feels less like a person and more like the living embodiment of how the past keeps poisoning everyone connected to Hope's End. And honestly, Mary's role in the story is small compared to some of the others, but she's incredibly important. Because Mary is basically the warning sign Kit almost ignores. She's the previous caregiver who started uncovering the truth about the Hope family before Kit even arrived. And she got too close. That's what makes the discovery of her body hit so hard. Suddenly, this isn't just an old mystery anymore. It's current, active, dangerous. Mary's death is the moment the story shifts from eerie Gothic suspense into something much more immediate and terrifying. Because now Kit realizes somebody is still willing to kill to keep the secrets buried. And then there's Jessie, who at first feels almost quiet enough to disappear into the background of the house. She's the cleaner at Hope's End, reserved and observant, always lingering just outside the center of things. But like everybody else in the story, there's far more going on beneath the surface. Eventually, we learn Jessie is actually Virginia's granddaughter, secretly connected to the very family she's been working around this entire time. And I really like what Jessie represents in this story, because unlike so many of the other characters, she's part of the possibility of something after all the violence, after all the lies, after decades of stolen identities and buried truths. By the end, she becomes part of this strange little found family that survives Hope's End and finally leaves the wreckage behind. And honestly, that's what makes this entire cast work so well together. Every single person in the story is connected by grief, guilt, lies, or buried history in some way. And the deeper Kit digs into Hope's End, the more she realizes this house was never just holding one secret. It was holding generations of them. So when you put all of these characters together, a caregiver chasing redemption, a woman trying to reclaim her stolen life, a sister who built everything on control, and a supporting cast full of secrets, lies, and hidden connections, it's no surprise that Hope's End doesn't just hold a mystery. It collapses under the weight of it. All right, so once you've got the characters down, the next layer of the story, the one that really gives it that Gothic punch, is the symbolism. Because in this book, nothing is just background. Everything is saying something. Let's start with the big one, the house. And honestly, Hope's End might be the scariest character in the entire book. Because this house feels wrong from the second Kit arrives. Not haunted in the ghost story sense, haunted in the way old family money and buried secrets can rot a place from the inside out. Everything about it feels like it's decaying in slow motion. The cliffs are eroding, the floors are unstable, entire sections of the mansion are basically being held together by denial and expensive wallpaper. And what makes it unsettling is that the people inside the house are doing the exact same thing. Everybody at Hope's End is pretending the past is dead, pretending the truth stayed buried, pretending this family wasn't destroyed decades ago. But the house never lets you forget it. Every creak, every crack in the walls, every storm rolling in off the ocean feels like the mansion trying to cough up the truth. By the end of the story, the collapse almost feels inevitable. Like the house had been carrying all these lies for so long that eventually it just gives out under the weight of them. Then you've got the rhyme, which is honestly one of the creepiest details. Because instead of remembering what actually happened, the town turns this brutal, traumatic event into a catchy little playground chant. Kids repeat it, People pass it around, and over time, it becomes the version of the story. Sound familiar? It's very Lizzie Borden coded, taking something horrific and packaging it into something almost playful, which is honestly kind of disturbing when you think about it. And what it really shows is how people treat true crime. They simplify it, they sensationalize it, they turn real pain into entertainment, into gossip, into something easy to consume. Meanwhile, the actual people involved, like Virginia, are left carrying the real trauma that nobody bothers to understand. But what I really love is that by the end, Virginia flips that narrative. She takes control of the rhyme, rewrites it, and basically says, "No, you don't get to tell my story anymore. I do." And that's a huge moment of her reclaiming her voice. And then there are the portraits, which honestly became way more unsettling the longer the story goes on. When Kit first arrives at Hope's End, she notices that some of the paintings are covered, others are damaged, and a few don't even seem to match the people they're supposed to represent. And right away, it creates this feeling that something inside the house isn't lining up properly, even if you can't fully explain why yet. Originally, those portraits were meant to project status. Winston Hope had them commissioned to make the family look polished, wealthy, untouchable, the kind of family that appears perfect hanging on the walls of a massive estate. But over time, the portraits stop feeling elegant and start feeling eerie because now they're part of the deception. Faces are hidden, identities are buried. Even the artwork has been manipulated to protect the truth of what really happened inside Hope's End. And I love that detail because it makes the house feel like it's actively helping preserve the lie. By the end, the portraits don't feel like family history anymore. They feel like evidence. And once you start seeing those parallels, it becomes impossible to ignore where Riley Sager was pulling some of this inspiration from. Because stories like this just don't appear out of nowhere. Gothic horror has always fed on real fears, real scandals, real bloodshed. And in The Only One Left, you can feel the ghost of one particular case lingering behind almost every page. A woman accused, a house stained by violence, a rhyme that turned murder into folklore. Lenora Hope doesn't just feel inspired by old true crime legends. She feels haunted by them. And there's this one case in particular that hangs over the story like a shadow. Lizzie Borden. So before we close the doors of Hope's End completely, let's step into one of the most infamous murder cases in American history. Welcome to Claw and Order. All right, let's set the scene. It's the morning of August 4th, 1892, in Fall River, Massachusetts, a quiet working-class town where nothing this brutal is supposed to happen. Inside a modest but well-kept home on 2nd Street, Andrew Borden, wealthy, strict, and known for being almost obsessively frugal, is lying on a couch in the sitting room. He's asleep, or at least he was, because sometime between 10:30 and 11 a.m., someone steps into that room carrying a hatchet. And what happens next is not quick. It's not controlled. It's violent in a way that feels personal. The first blow lands directly into his face, hard enough to split the bone. Then another, and another. By the time it's over, Andrew Borden had been struck 10 or 11 times. His features almost unrecognizable. But what makes this even more chilling is that he wasn't the first. Upstairs, earlier that same morning, his wife Abby, Lizzie's stepmother, was quietly going about her day, dusting the guest room. She never saw it coming. She's attacked from behind, hit again and again and again, 18 to 19 times. with such force that one of the blows actually drives the hatchet blade into her skull. So, this isn't just murder. This is rage. This is overkill. And somehow it all happens inside that house without anyone stopping it, which is where things take an even darker turn. Because when you look at who was there that morning, the list is incredibly short. The family maid, Bridget Sullivan, and Lizzie Borden. Lizzie later claims she had been outside in the barn for about 20 minutes, looking for fishing gear, which already feels a little strange. August heat, a dusty barn, and a long stretch of time for something that didn't seem all that urgent. And then, just after 11 a.m., she calls out to Bridget, "Come quick, Father's dead." From that moment on, the house fills with people, neighbors, police, and almost immediately, something feels off. There's no sign of forced entry, no evidence of a struggle beyond the victims themselves. No one's seen fleeing the property, which leaves one deeply unsettling possibility. Whoever did this never had to break in. They were already inside. As investigators start pulling at the edges, things don't get cleaner. They get stranger. A hatchet is discovered in the basement, its handle looking almost too clean. Witnesses later claimed Lizzie had tried to purchase poison the day before the murders. And then there's the detail that really sticks. A few days later, Lizzie is seen burning a dress in the kitchen stove. She says it had paint on it. But by this point, people are starting to wonder if that's really what she was trying to get rid of. Still, for all the suspicion, there's a problem. There's no definite proof. No bloodstained weapon tied directly to her. No one who saw it happen. Just a growing sense that something isn't right, and that the truth is sitting just out of reach. By the time the trial begins in June of 1893, the case has become a national obsession. Newspapers are covering every detail. People are arguing over it in the streets because this isn't just about what happened. It's about who people believe is capable of something like this. Lizzie sits in that courtroom as a respectable, well-dressed, church-going woman. And for many people at that time, that image clashes hard with the brutality of the crime. Her defense leans into that. They question the investigation. They emphasize the lack of hard evidence. And quietly but powerfully, they rely on something else. The belief that a woman like Lizzie simply wouldn't, or couldn't, commit this kind of violence. And after just about an hour of deliberation, the jury comes back. Not guilty. But here's the part that never goes away. Acquittal isn't the same as innocence in the public eye. Because almost immediately, Lizzie stops being just a person and starts becoming something else entirely. A story, a symbol, a warning. And that transformation gets captured in a rhyme that people are still repeating more than a century later. Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks. When she had seen what she had done, she gave her father 41. Now, those numbers aren't even accurate, but that's not the point. Because the rhyme isn't about facts, it's about memory. About the way a community processes something horrific by turning it into something simple, something repeatable, something almost detached. It flattens the violence, it erases the complexity, and most of all, it locks Lizzie into a version of herself that she never escapes. And once you hear that, once you really sit with it, it becomes impossible not to see the parallels. Because just like Lenora Hope, Lizzie Borden becomes a name people think they understand. A story that gets passed down. A reputation that never fades. And that might be the most unsettling part of all. Not just what happened inside that house, but how the world decided what it meant and never let it change. Thank you guys so much for tuning back into Murder Mitten Kittens Book Club. This book was one of my favorites, and I feel like I say that a lot, but this book just had my attention from the very start. And the way it's written so beautifully and so dark really encapsulates this horrific murder, and you're just kind of stuck figuring it all out along with Kit during the story. And it just makes me more excited to read more books by Riley Sager. So I hope a lot of other people go and pick up this book because it is just so wonderful and so crazy. I did not expect anything to happen. It was just twist after twist after twist. And then when it was finally over, I was like, wow, it was complete cinema inside my own head. So applause to Riley Sager. Thank you so much for bestowing this amazing novel on us, and I can't wait to read more. Anyways, you guys know I love you so much, and thank you so, so much for sticking around and giving me a chance to share my art form with all of you guys. Again, you can find my podcast anywhere you get your podcast: Apple Music, Spotify, Amazon Music, and also the short video form on YouTube, which we have not gotten into full video recording yet, but that is in the works. You can follow me along on my TikTok and Instagram to see behind the scenes and announcements when the next podcast will drop at Murder Mitten Kittens BC. And that's the story of Hope's End, a place where grief turned into a legend, where truth became folklore, and an entire family disappeared beneath decades of lies. Until next time, stay cool, stay curious, and remember, every haunted house is really just a story somebody was desperate to keep quiet. I'll see you next time.